Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Security Solutions TV. Today we are talking about the importance of data recovery, both in the context of real-world execution and from a perspective of future planning and preparation. Our guest is Martin Creighan. Martin is Vice President Asia Pacific at Commvault. He is responsible for organisational leadership, change management, business development and human resources for Commvault's dynamic team in APAC. Martin is a highly experienced professional with a stellar record of achievement in senior leadership roles across the Australia technology sector. As well as a long list of industry certifications, he holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from the Australian National University. Martin, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
To get us started, for those people watching who may not be familiar, can you begin by giving us a brief overview of who Commvault is and what you do, and namely, how the business has morphed from being largely a data recovery business into a cyber resilience business over the last few years, and why?
Yeah, Commvault's been in the actual data protection and cyber resilience industry for more than 28 years. And through that time and over that period, we've gone from specializing in backup, moving into data protection, and now the leader in cyber resilience.
So how long does it generally take to get back to normal after a breach?
Yeah, for a business or an enterprise that has had a cyber incident or a data breach, the first steps to getting back to recovery are number one, isolating the incident. Number two, having a plan, an incident plan specifically, and enacting the plan. Number three, working with platforms such as Commvault to actually recover the data and the application so that you can get back to work. And then number four, and most importantly, is retesting the plan and having a plan in place to make sure that it doesn't happen again. We can do that, by the way, John, by utilizing what we call the Commvault Clean Room Recovery, which is a new service that we just launched in February to help these enterprise organizations test their recoveries and plan step by step. The first steps in actually recovering from a cyber incident or a data breach is number one, isolating the incident and understanding what has taken place. Number two is enacting your cyber incident or cyber security plan, a plan that should have been tested on a regular basis to make sure that you can recover not only your data, but the critical applications that are important to making your data and your company run. In fact, this is the essence of what we call cyber resilience. The true definition of cyber resilience is the enterprise capability to be under attack and continue to operate. And the only way that the companies can do that are under attack is by isolating the incident, getting some forensics to make sure they have tested and ensure that all their data and applications are clean, and then making sure that that plan is in place and tested on an ongoing basis.
I just want to drill down on something you just mentioned regarding people potentially having a cyber plan, but not necessarily knowing where it is. We know it's not uncommon from a compliance point of view for organisations to develop a cyber plan as part of a, say, tick box exercise, for lack of a better term, to ensure that they meet their compliance requirements, but then not go back and review that plan for years, or in some cases many years. Given the rapidly changing threat landscape, especially in the face of the increasing prevalence and power of AI, how frequently should organisations be revisiting that cybersecurity plan?
So normally for a company that has been breached, it takes some time. In fact, in March of this year, Commvault has actually released their 5th edition of what we call the State of Data Readiness Report. This report or survey was a survey of 500 plus companies across ANZ in conjunction with TRA, which is Tech Research Asia, to ask enterprise and government organizations how cyber ready are they in the case of an incident. We found some really interesting stats and facts to come out of that survey. The first one is that over 70% of organizations across ANZ say they have a cyber incident or a cyber security or cyber recovery plan. However, 12% surprisingly said they don't know where it is, or when they went to look for it, they couldn't find it. The real key here is making sure you have a plan. But what the report also showed us is there's a massive discrepancy between what the executive team thinks in regards to how long it should take to recover versus what IT ops and SecOps think how long it should take to recover. The survey showing us that most executive teams want their services to be back online within 24 to 48 hours. When we asked the same questions of the IT ops and security teams, they said it normally takes 5 to 7 business days. However, after working with more than 500 enterprise organizations over the last 6 months, helping them recover, we have found that it can take up to 5 to 8 weeks to get to full recovery. And in some cases, in fact, 30% of organizations, it could take them 3 months or more to get to full recovery.
That's hilarious. In fact, now that I think about it, this probably applies to a wide range of situations, including things like password management. I mean, after all, we are frequently told that best practice these days is to use a password manager, but what if it happens you're locked out of your machine or system? How do you access or recover those passwords if you can't get into that machine?
Interestingly enough, cybersecurity plans aren't tested on a regular enough basis. And I'll give you a couple of stories that are local here to ANZ. I was working with a local manufacturing firm here in Australia, specifically in Melbourne, and I was talking to them about how often they test their cyber incident plan or their incident response plan and their cyber recovery plan. This particular organization was storing and protecting over 1.2 petabytes of data, which is a pretty significant data estate. They did all the hard work in identifying what their critical applications and their crown jewels were in relation to the data. And so they wrote a plan to make sure that they can recover in the case of an incident. What they, however, forgot was that in finding the plan or writing the plan, they also stored the plan on a server. And during the actual exercises of taking down their applications, their servers, and their information in regards to actually simulating a cyber incident, they took down the server that had the cyber incident response plan on it, and then they therefore had no plan. So what they found out very quickly, John, was they had to go back and say, oh, one of the things we just found out, and one of the lessons we learned, is we must also maybe have a hard copy of the plan, but also have the plan itself stored in multiple different locations. And for me, that is a great example. And the reason being is many enterprise organizations and government agencies today will tell you they go through the practice of testing on a regular basis. And that testing is normally driven by the requirements of meeting compliance regulations or maybe the requirements of the internal security team of the company. And most organizations will do BCP or disaster recovery planning every 6 to 12 months. However, when they do this planning, it's usually more of a tabletop exercise or a checklist that they're going through and they're checking off step by step. Do we have a plan? Yes. Do we have all the servers in place? Yes. Do we have the backups? Yes, and so on. But they don't actually test the recovery. And it's not until they actually have an incident when they realize, wow, we haven't got a thorough plan, a step-by-step guide, or what we call a playbook to make sure that we can recover and we can do it as fast as possible.
So we've seen a spate of cyber attacks against some pretty high-profile organisations in the last few years, and I feel that there is a growing sentiment amongst those affected by the attacks that the organisations involved should have been doing a better job in protecting their data. For example, if a major financial institution is breached, you often hear comments to the effect of, well, surely as such a high-profile company, company X should have expected this or known that they were going to be a target and been better prepared. Is this a reasonable expectation, or have we reached a point where it's no longer a case of if an organisation is going to be successfully breached, but rather just a case of when it will happen?
It's a great question. So it's not a matter of if, but when you get hacked, and that is a reality today. And what we're finding in the large industry, and specifically in regulated industry, for an example, here in Australia, we have SOCI, or the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act. We also have regulators like APRA, who are regulating our banking, finance, and insurance industries to make sure that they comply with a bunch of technology requirements, but most importantly, that they comply to cybersecurity requirements and making sure that they protect the data of Australian and New Zealand citizens. Now, what we're finding is that most banking and finance organizations or most government agencies do have a plan in place. However, are they testing it to the depths that they should? Do they have a clear strategy in place? Do they have a run book in place or a playbook in place or a script in place? Do they have their applications classified in a way that says, here's our top critical applications and here's our data? And most importantly, do they have a primary copy of their data, a backup copy of their data, and in today's world, a third party or tertiary copy of that data that's immutable and air-gapped so that they can ensure that if they are hacked or they are under attack and they have ransomware in their environment and the bad guys are getting in, the hackers take that data and they encrypt it, they have multiple data sources that they can go to recover the data. Now, what we're finding is most of the organizations that are regulated by compliance have a plan. They actually have backup. But what they're not doing is they're not testing on a regular basis. We recommend that you should be testing at least on a quarterly basis, specifically when it comes to your crown jewels or your critical data and your critical applications. And the reason for that is because the threat vector and the attack vector is widening, increasing, and accelerating on a day-to-day basis. So to keep up with those vectors and to ensure that your data is secure, we recommend testing on a regular basis.
For a long time, the prevailing wisdom around data backup was the old 3-2-1 rule. 3 backups, 2 on-site, 1 off-site. Is this still the case?
That's the optimum. And not only is that the case, the one that's off-site should be immutable and should be air-gapped. So that would be operating at an optimal level. However, what we're finding is there's a cost that goes along with that. And as enterprise organizations and government agencies are looking at cost reductions on a regular basis, sometimes they don't actually apply that 3-2-1 principle anymore. So our recommendation is at least have your primary, have a backup, and then have a third copy that's immutable and air-gapped. Most importantly, make sure that you're testing the recovery and the capability to recover those critical applications. I mentioned a little bit earlier, we actually did the State of Data Readiness report, this survey. In the survey, when we asked the questions about testing, how often are you testing and how deep are the tests, what we found is that most organizations were adhering to some sort of a BCP or disaster recovery test, which is once every 12 months. However, the advanced organizations and the ones that have increased regulation around them are now doing it on a more regular basis. But they were doing tabletop exercises. They weren't really taking down the application and recovering the data from an alternate source and bringing up the application again from its grassroots. And that means that they weren't really testing end-to-end. Could they recover that application? Can they recover that data? And can they continue to operate? So when we're talking to these executives and we're talking to these enterprises and agencies, we ask the question, you have a regulator saying you need to test. Your own internal controls and regulations say you need to test. Why are you not testing to the nth degree, to the grassroots, and making sure that you can bring up your applications and recover your critical data in the case of an incident? They highlighted 3 key reasons. The first one is cost. It costs so much money to do that, to bring down our environment, to bring it back up, to test end-to-end. Cost, large cost. We have to have extra storage, extra servers, extra infrastructure, and so on. The second one was people. We don't have the skills and the experiences. We're flat out running our day-to-day operations as it is. We sure as heck don't have the luxury of having a separate testing team or a separate organization that can do that testing for us. And then the third thing that came up was the availability of people and infrastructure, or people, process, and technology as a whole. So as a company, Commvault took a look at that. And we said, how can we help our customers on this journey that we've been through from backup to data protection and now into cyber resiliency? How can we really help our customers? And that's where we came up with this concept of the clean room. The clean room is on-demand infrastructure that we spin up in the public cloud. We bookend it with Commvault technology and software, so we threat scan on the way in and threat scan on the way out. And we use our partners in our ecosystem to help our customers write the run books, the playbooks, the scripts, step-by-step recovery processes that they need to be able to recover in a fast and a rapid and secure environment. This is really starting to help enterprises and governments get to the testing processes they really need to get to.
So I want to explore what are, in your experience, the most important things an organization can do to prepare for an attack and mitigate as much damage as possible. However, in asking that question, I can't help but ask about the amount and kinds of data organizations are holding, or perhaps hoarding would be a more appropriate term these days. We know that when it comes to data recovery, the volume of data that needs to be recovered has a direct impact on the cost of the recovery, the time it takes to recover, and the resources required to recover. To that end, in discussing the most important things an organization can do to prepare for an attack and mitigate as much damage as possible, would a prudent first step be a thorough audit of exactly what is being held in the way of data and why?
So there are 2 or 3 big challenges with data protection and cyber resiliency and ensuring that an organization, an enterprise, an agency has the ability to protect their data and then recover it rapidly. One of the actual challenges that they have today is with the introduction of AI. Every company is starting to get involved and use AI on a more regular basis. What that's really doing is exponentially exploding the increase or the acceleration of how much data they actually have. What it's also doing is creating a bunch of unstructured data versus structured data. And enterprises and government agencies are struggling with, how do I protect, classify, store, and potentially recover that unstructured data, number one. And then how do I actually also do that with, of course, our structured data that we know is on-site and critical. So that's one aspect. AI driving a data explosion globally, exponentially increasing the amount of data we have in store. The second is most organizations are struggling with data and data classification. And then when you add in the added complexity around regulators and what they require in regards to how much data you store, how long you keep it, how it needs to be classified, and how you recover it, it creates a really complex environment. So what we would recommend from a Commvault point of view is, just in regards to your data, first and foremost, make sure you have a solid data classification plan in place. What data is critical to your organization and critical to the ongoing operation of your business, and classify that data as your crown jewels. This is the data that's critical to our business, and this is the applications that are utilizing that data to run our business on a regular basis. The second thing is, make sure that you are looking at your data classification and your data retention policies. Once again, I'll use another organization here in Melbourne that we were speaking to just recently, who actually had over a petabyte of unstructured data sitting on premise. They said, well, we don't want to get rid of that data because we don't know what's in it. We don't know what to do with it. So what we'll do is we'll just shift all of that data off premise into SharePoint. That should take care of it. Which I thought was an interesting strategy, because yes, most organizations globally are moving to a cloud-first architecture. However, just taking a bunch of unstructured data with nothing classified or no classification to that data, not knowing what's in it, could be impacted or infected already, and then putting it into a public cloud-based architecture isn't really meeting the needs of understanding what's there, classification of that data, scanning of that data to see if there's any threats, and then ultimately protecting and recovering that data. So there's big challenges that enterprises face on a day-to-day basis, and one of them is making sure they have a solid data classification program in place, that they have solid retention policies in place, and they're adhering to those retention policies. And then most importantly, if they're not utilizing the data, they've met their retention policies, having a data deletion policy in place so they no longer have that data or are responsible for it.
Yeah. Interestingly, it seems that in the rush to collect data, some organizations have lost sight of the basic principles of security, whether it be physical or cyber security. For example, we know that we don't spend $1,000 to protect a $100 asset. So if an organization can't even identify the value of the data they are holding because they don't know what the data is, then how do you accurately assess what is a reasonable cost for securing that data?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges facing these organizations and agencies is the fact that there's a ton of unstructured or data that's coming into the organization from multiple endpoints, whether it's being generated automatically by AI or the Internet of Things, which is introducing even more endpoints, billions of endpoints globally, and creating data as well. One of the challenges with this organization or an agency faces is I now have to protect it. And am I willing to, once again, take on board the cost, the complexity, and the projects of having to classify that data, protect that data, store that data, and so on? The answer is it's pretty important that you know what you're protecting and you know what data you have. So getting through that process and having the right processes in place in regards to data retention, data classification, data storage, and then therefore data protection and cyber recovery is absolutely critical. Now, most organizations struggle with the cost of doing that. And with AI introducing new data streams, we have data centers being built just for AI. How do we put a harness around that to ensure that our costs are not escalating? There's a couple of different ways to do that. And one of them is making sure that you have a plan that says, I'm going to have some unstructured data and I'm going to store it in an area that's not connected to the rest of my environment, that keeps me secure, but I know I need to keep it until I can get through it, until we can make it structured data, or until I can scan it, make sure there's no threats in it, or I can scan it and make sure that there's nothing in there, i.e. insights that are critical to my business or IP that's critical to my business. So there's plans and strategies that we can put in place on how we store that data, how we keep it, and how we maintain it, versus the data that is structured that I need on a day-to-day basis to run my business in a continuous operation.
Okay, so what are your top 3 or 4 things that an organization needs to prepare for to mitigate against an attack in order to maximize their chances of preventing a successful cyber attack?
Yeah, the top 2 or 3 things that an organization should consider in mitigating against an attack is, number 1, having the right data retention policies, data classification policies, and most importantly, data protection and cyber resiliency policies in place, i.e. you have an incident plan. You have a plan, or you actually have a strategy on how you're going to store data, where you're going to keep it, and so on. That's number 1. Many organizations don't even have number 1 covered. So do I have a plan around data protection, data storage, data retention, data classification, and then how I can recover that data? Number 2 is a testing plan in regards to the critical data and the critical applications that I need to continually run as a business. The standard enterprise today, even here in Australia and New Zealand, standard enterprise is running anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 business applications. It's a phenomenal amount of applications that they need to run on a day-to-day basis. And those applications have access to critical data all across the organization in a multi-cloud and multi-hybrid environment, meaning that most enterprise organizations will have data stored on-premise. They might have a private cloud. They might have data out on the edge. They might have data in a public cloud, etc. So they operate in a hybrid world. Operating in a hybrid world builds complexity into your enterprise or into your agency. So what you need to do is have the right strategy, the right processes, and the right plans in place. And then number 2, you need to make sure that you're testing those operations and those plans. And then third, you need to make sure that you're updating them as the threat vectors and the attack vectors continue to operate, continue to advance, continue to accelerate. You need to ensure that you're keeping up with the bad guys.
Well, Martin, that's all been very enlightening. If people want to know more about Commvault, where do they actually go?
Well, first and foremost, if people want to know more about Commvault and what we do, please visit www.commvault.com. Second of all, I would love for you to take away the fact that Commvault are the leaders in cyber resilience. What does that mean? That means that we are absolutely the organization that can work with you on what we call your continuous business in this cloud-first world, making sure that your applications and your business are online and resilient all the time. If I were an organization or an agency, I would really take a look at how we're protecting our assets, what assets are most critical to running my business and my business organization, and then how do I test those assets to make sure, and test those plans, etc., to make sure that I can keep my business operational. If you need any information on how to do this, Commvault can help you. We're here. We have our team across all your major capital cities, across Australia, New Zealand, and we'd love to actually help any organization, enterprise, or agency that needs help.
Martin, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for joining us on the channel.
Thank you, John.